Are there any other papers? Are there any petitions? Paper or petition? Are there any petitions? Thank you. Do any ministers have notices of motion? Does the Leader of the Opposition have a notice of motion?
Not today.
Does an opposition member have a notice of motion? The Honourable Peter Primrose.
Mr President, I give notice that on the next sitting day I will move that under Standing Order 52 there be laid upon the table of the House within 21 days of the date of passing of this resolution the following documents created since 30th of June 2017 in the possession, custody or control of the Department of Education relating to the Newcastle Education Precinct. As the notice is lengthy, copies are available from the clerk.
Thank you. Does any crossbench member have a notice of motion? Mr President. The Honourable Member.
Mr President, I give notice on the next sitting day that I will move 1, that in view of the report of the Independent Legal Arbiter, the Honourable Keith Mason ACQC, on the disputed claim privilege on documents relating to an order for papers regarding floodplain harvesting dated 11th of June 2020, this House orders that the documents considered by the Independent Legal Arbiter not to be privileged be laid upon the table by the clerk subject to paragraph 2. And as the motion is lengthy, a copy will be available at the clerk's.
Thank you. Any government member with a notice of motion? The Honourable Member.
Thank you, Mr President. I give notice on the next sitting day I'll move 1, that this House notes that in June 2020, as we speak in fact, Wesley Jones, Luke Farquhar, Shannon Dodd, James Bibby, Dean Chivas, Blair Sidhu and Ben Holdstock are cycling from the Cricketers Arms Hotel in Melbourne to the Cricketers Arms Hotel in Sydney, and the 900-kilometre journey over 6 days will raise funds for Beyond Blue to help improve the lives of individuals, families and communities affected by anxiety, depression and suicide. The ride also aims to raise awareness of mental health and the importance of friendships during rough times, and the men initially aimed to raise $10,000 for Beyond Blue and have now exceeded their goal with more than $12,000 donated. I move that this House congratulates the men on achieving their fundraising goal and wishes them every success as they complete their journey from Melbourne to Sydney this week.
Does any opposition member have a notice of motion? Does any crossbench member? The Honourable Member.
Mr President, I give notice on the next sitting day I will move 1, that this House notes that A, there are approximately 25,000 workers employed in abattoirs across Australia. B, these workers collectively slaughter up to 3 animals per second, which translates to 10,000 animals per hour, day in and day out, using cruel methods that have been normalised by the animal agribusiness industry. C, it is not surprising that slaughterhouse work has been linked to a range of disorders, including perpetrator-induced traumatic stress, which is a lesser-known form of post-traumatic stress disorder. D, a 2013 Queensland study found that people who work in abattoirs are more likely to be desensitised to animal suffering and to have a propensity towards aggression, which could make them more likely to be violent towards humans. And E, this is consistent with overseas research which found that towns with abattoirs had higher rates of domestic violence and violent crimes, including murder and sexual assault. And 2, that this House acknowledges the serious negative effects that slaughterhouses have on both workers and animals.
Thank you, Mr President. I give notice that next sitting day I will move that leave be given to bring in a bill for an act to amend the Crimes, Domestic and Personal Violence Act 2007 with respect to coercive control and abusive behaviour in domestic relationships and for related purposes. The Crimes, Domestic and Personal Violence Amendment, Coercive and Controlling Behaviour Bill.
Are there any other notices of motion? The Honourable Member.
Mr President, I give notice that on the next sitting day I will move 1, that this House notes that A, fish farming is a form of intensive aqua business where fish are bred in underwater enclosures and slaughtered for human consumption. B, similar to intensive farms on land, intensive fish farms are overcrowded, unfamiliar environments that prevent fish from moving around freely and expressing their natural behaviours. C, there is a large body of scientific evidence which demonstrates that fish are highly intelligent animals that feel pain and suffer in a similar way to humans. D, farmed fish suffer from high levels of stress, injury and disease, in part because they have no way to escape attacks from other fish, parasites and predators. E, the conditions on fish farms are so traumatic that it is common for up to 1/4 of salmon to float lifelessly on the surface of their tanks, suffering from a condition that scientists say is akin to severe depression. And F, at the end of their lives, these captive farmed fish are then slaughtered using the same inhumane methods used on wild fish, including being gutted alive while fully conscious. 2, that this House acknowledges the pain and suffering of fish held captive in fish farms.
Are there any other notices of motion? Are there any postponements? I inform the House of the publication in today's Hansard of a written answer to a supplementary question without notice lodged with the clerk. Government Whip.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move, according to sessional order, that standing and sessional orders be suspended to allow the moving of a motion forthwith relating to conduct of business of the House.
Motion of that of the Government Whip. All in favour say aye. Against say no. I believe the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Government Whip.
Thank you. I move that the order of private members' business for today be as follows. 1. Private members' business item number 517, standing in the name of Mr Buttigieg, relating to building amendment, mechanical services, medical gas work, Bill 2020. 2. Private members' business item number 546, standing in the name of Ms Cusack, relating to vandalism of public monuments. 3. Private members' business item number 554, standing in the name of Ms Boyd, relating to an order for papers regarding funding of independent disability advisory services. Private members' business item number 306, standing in the name of Mr Banasiak, relating to an order for papers regarding recreational fishing around Sydney Harbour. 5. Private members' business item number 557, standing in the name of Mr Roberts, relating to deaths in custody. 6. Private members' business item number 558, standing in the name of Mr Fang, relating to Regional Youth Task Force. 7. Private members' business item number 533, standing in the name of Ms Hurst, relating to puppy farms. 8. Private members' business item number 139, standing in the name of Reverend Mr Nile, relating to Crimes Amendment Zoe Law Bill 2019. 9. Private members' business item number 507, standing in the name of Mr Veach, relating to Water Management Amendment, Water Allocations, Drought Information Bill 2020. 10. Private members' business item number 555, standing in the name of Mrs Ward, relating to nighttime economy. 11. Private members' business item number 570, standing in the name of Ms Fairman, relating to Gomori People, Sacred Sites and Artefacts. Private members' business item number 567, standing in the name of Mr Pearson, relating to restoration of the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Amendment, Restriction on Stock Animals Procedures Bill 2019. 13. Private members' business item 573, standing in the name of Mr Field, relating to an order for papers regarding bushfire-affected forests. 14. Private members' business item number 548, standing in the name of Mr Latham, relating to Tomago Aluminium Smelter. 15. Private members' business item number 550, standing in the name of Mr Secord, relating to impact of COVID-19 on the state's economy. 16. Private members' business item 504, standing in the name of Mr Banasiak, relating to an order for papers regarding rules-based environment water. 17. Private members' business item number 564, standing in the name of Ms Boyd, relating to domestic violence statistics. 18. Private members' business item 556, standing in the name of Mrs Housis, relating to an order for papers regarding electronic devices provided to schools. 19. Private members' business item number 565, standing in the name of Mr Graham, relating to ancient Indigenous caves in Junkan Gorge. 20. Private members' business item number 488, standing in the name of Mrs McLaren Jones, relating to 75th anniversary of Victory in Europe Day. 21. Private members' business item 560, standing in the name of Mr Shoebridge, relating to Select Committee on the Oversight role performed by Law Enforcement Conduct Commission. Number 22, private members' business, item number 478, standing in the name of Mr Searle, relating to an order for papers regarding TAFE underpayments. And 23, private members' business, item number 526, standing in the name of Ms Fairman, relating to poker machines. I also indicate that the committee agreed that the following items would be moved in short format: 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 22, 23 and 24. 23, sorry, that's it. Sorry.
The motion of that of the government whip. All in favour say aye. Aye. Against say no. I believe the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honourable members, I announce, according to resolution of continuing effect, it is necessary to choose a member to be Assistant President. I now call for nominations for the office of Assistant President. Mr Latham.
I nominate my colleague, the Honourable Rod Roberts, for the position of Assistant President, confident in the knowledge he'll do a very good job for the Chamber.
Thank you.
Mr President,
Parliamentary Secretary.
I propose and move to the House that Reverend the Honourable Fred Nile, MLC, be Assistant President.
Mr President. Oh, where did that come from?
The Leader of the Opposition is seeking the call. No one else.
Mr President.
Thank you.
I propose to the House and move that the Honourable Courtney Husos, MLC, be Assistant President. And, Mr President, I'd like to speak briefly to that nomination.
You are permitted to do so.
It's important for us to understand that this isn't just an office, a bauble or a trinket to be shared around. It's an important office of this chamber. And it's important that in filling this role, we have a person who can not only to the community represent the chamber effectively and send a clear signal that we take it seriously, as we should a presiding officer, but that the person who fills it is functional, alert and able to fulfil all of their duties when in the chair. I think this is a very important qualification, and I would urge all members in casting their vote to put that at the forefront of their mind.
Before I call the Parliamentary Secretary, look, I know that with the COVID situation, I indicated if you need to have discussions, I was going to permit that because I think it's important. But I did ask that if the discussions are going to be had, that they're important discussions and vital discussions. If it's simply a matter of having a chit-chat, it's very difficult for me to hear the member I've given the call to. So, again, if we could just keep the discussions to a minimum, that'd be great. Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr President. I rise to speak in support of my nomination for Reverend the Honourable Fred Nile as Assistant President. As the longest-standing member of this House and most experienced member, it's important that we bring to the office of Assistant President somebody who understands the magnitude of the task of this chamber, represents it and is capable with the knowledge of long-standing experience of being able to represent the good work that we do here. Reverend the Honourable Fred Nile has served in the position of Assistant President for 11 years. He is well acquainted with the role and he is well able to discharge those responsibilities, having done so and being aware of the requirements. He's served on a number of committees, many more committees than I'm able to in the 1 minute articulate here, but he brings his experience, having given to this chamber long-standing service and a respectful manner in which he deals with all members in this chamber, unlike others. I think he brings a gravitas to the position, and I commend his nomination to the House and to all members.
Before I call the honourable member, members will have an opportunity to express their view of who they want to vote for by way of a secret ballot. It is not necessary for them to express views or comment when a member is speaking in support of a candidate. I find that incredibly disrespectful. The honourable member.
Thank you, Mr. President. Speaking in support of my nomination of the Honourable Rod Roberts, I want to assure the chamber he is indeed functional, meeting the criteria that was set by the Labor opposition. More than functional, he's had a distinguished professional career as a police officer, meaning he can easily handle the rowdy crowd over here and any other retrobates around the chamber, which from time to time might even include me. I know from his distinguished service as the Deputy Leader of One Nation that from time to time he'll even put me in my place. So he will be even-handed, independent and reliable in this chamber. He's impressed every member with his common sense and level-headed attitude over this parliamentary term, and he will serve with great distinction as a very fine Assistant President of this wonderful chamber, the oldest standing democratic chamber in the country.
Southern Hemisphere.
The world.
Southern Hemisphere.
Are there any further nominations? There being no further nominations, I've now received 3 nominations: the Honourable Rod Roberts, the Honourable Fred Noel and the Honourable Courtney Houssos. We will now proceed to a Thank you. Before we proceed to the ballot, I invite the Honourable Rod Roberts and the Honourable Courtney Houssos and the Honourable Fred Noel if they wish to address the chamber. The Honourable Rod Roberts, do you wish to address the chamber?
No, I don't, Mr. President. I just submit myself to the will of the House.
Thank you. The Honourable Courtney Houssos, do you wish to
submit myself to the will.
Thank you. And the Honourable Fred Noel.
I'm convinced.
President, I submit myself to the will of the House.
Thank you. I thank the honourable members.
Interested? Submit yourself?
There being 3 nominations, according to standing order, a ballot will be held. Before proceeding to the ballot, the bells will be rung for 5 minutes. Ring the bells.
Oh, 5 minutes. Very good.
Can I indicate to honourable members at the conclusion of the bells, I will be locking the doors and the doors will remain locked until the conclusion of the ballot.
Oh, yes, please. Thank you very much. Thank you.
No, not just that, but also I think they haven't been struck. Even they were
But he'll get 5 and he'll get 6 which is not.
Anyone?
I said to, I just raised that with Sam.
Yeah, I do.
Just never know.
Yeah, don't know.
That's what this place does to people.
Yeah, no, you're probably going to pass back for this. At least on the first ballot.
Well, if they would have helped One Nation or Premier League, go your hardest.
Lock the doors. Honourable members, the House will now proceed to a ballot. Ballot papers will now be distributed by the clerks to all members in their places. Can I indicate there is no requirement for a member to be seated or standing? It's a matter for the member. But I would ask to assist the clerk that you at least remain within the places that you currently occupy. Members are requested to write upon the paper the name of the candidate for whom they wish to vote. It should be one name only. When voting is completed, the clerks will ask members to deposit the paper in the ballot box and they will come to you to collect those papers. Honourable members, the three candidates are the Honourable Rod Roberts, the Honourable Fred Nile and the Honourable Courtney Hughes. I again remind members that only one name should be placed on the ballot. If there is more than one name, it will be an informal vote.
Adam, how do you spell Searle?
Is it I before E in Vitch or the other way?
Yeah, well, morning's not over yet.
You certainly had a good time with Kathleen this morning, I can tell.
Again, the clerks will come to you to collect the ballot papers.
Hey, Frankers, this is a nice looking box.
Members will note that there are no papers currently in the box and the box is being locked. There's nothing up their sleeves.
Labor Party? David loves reading the ballots. No, stack it here. It's a beautiful box. Not like our pre-selection box, Frankers.
Definitely getting it.
But I have palpitations, Pat.
Didn't you lose the good one?
Yeah, they lost one.
Oh, good.
That's our lucky box. We don't know what's going to happen. My friend is very amazing. It's like everyone in this chamber is it's changing. This would be the cream of
Before you go down, I like that one. It's been there.
Wow, beautiful boxes.
You're quite impressed by that.
David is upstairs.
Or other than this?
David is collecting all the ballots from upstairs.
You don't need.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't need a reason.
Ours is silver with an axe. And then
Never seen that before.
Well, not for a while.
Democracy. Magnificent, isn't it?
Sausages and rolls.
Yeah, that's what you shouldn't say, yeah.
Wafting through the chamber.
Honourable members, before I ask the clerks to open the boxes and commence counting the ballots, each candidate is permitted to nominate a scrutineer. Does the Honourable Rod Roberts wish to nominate a scrutineer? Thank you. Thank you. Does the Honourable Fred Nile wish to nominate?
Never agree to that. Never agree to that.
Order. Does the Honourable Fred Nile wish to nominate a scrutineer?
I'm happy with the clerk.
Thank you. Does the Honourable Courtney Hughes wish to nominate a scrutineer?
Yes, I do trust the clerks, but I am a member of the Labour Party, so I will nominate.
I respect that comment.
Thank you. Fine. Okay, the clerks will now open the boxes and commence the count. Mark, you should be a little bit away.
Careful, Taylor, you'll fall over there.
I'm not
Yeah, true. Yeah, you're
centre of gravity.
Centre of gravity.
I
You're
catch
fine.
you, Taylor. Get him a safety break.
I'm going to watch Mike, see how it's done. Remember when you sacked me as your scrutineer, Sam?
Really?
There's a few. There's a few. Friggin' got him a few wins, and then when he went for the big one, he sacked me.
National Party dirty woman.
It's all right. I'm slowly moving on, as you can see.
You do hold a grudge.
I do hold a terrible grudge. I'm a terrible grudge holder.
Never forget.
Just a warning to everyone. Sammy's always asking me, so which one did you throw? I only won, so he obviously won someone that you get too funny. I think my life just
Honourable members, I announce the result of this ballot as follows. The Honourable Rod Roberts, 15 votes. The Honourable Fred Nile, 6 votes. The Honourable Courtney Hughes, 20 votes. As no member has received the 50% plus 1 vote, it will be necessary to conduct a second ballot. As the Honourable Fred Nile has received the least number of votes, he will be excluded from the second ballot. The second ballot will therefore be the Honourable Rod Roberts and the Honourable Courtney Hughes. I will again ask the clerks to distribute the ballot papers and again request members remain in their area while that business.
And for 20.
Again, honourable members, the two candidates are the Honourable Rod Roberts and the Honourable Courtney Hughes. You are required to put one name only on the ballot. If there is more than one name, the ballot vote will be informal.
Damien,
Again, the clerks will come to you. There are nothing in the boxes. As soon as one of them is opened.
We're watching you, Stephen.
Nothing in the boxes. Thank you. Lock the boxes. Clerks will collect the ballots.
what have we got? 23 items today?
Yep. Yep. Tomorrow, yeah, oh good. What have you got tomorrow for us?
It's like 3 bills or something. I don't know what.
They're not controversial ones though either. No.
Because that's the way they were trying to design it. Late nights Tuesday, Wednesday, or Tick and Flick on Thursday. And everyone gets to leave on reason. Touch wood so far. It's okay.
I'm not used to the late nights. I've been going to bed early, except when I've developed a bad habit of staying up late on weekends. Watching video.
Yes. Before I ask the clerks to open the boxes, does the Honourable Courtney Hughes wish to again appoint a scrutineer? The opposition whip. Thank you. Does the Honourable Rod wish to appoint a scrutineer now?
So we're getting the pointy end of business.
Yes,
Yes. Former member of the Labor Party, I'm sure.
can
Open
count.
the boxes.
He can count.
No, a ballot rule
Yeah,
from
like the
way
kids
back. I could have been on 7 minutes.
Then I wake up early.
Yeah.
I hope that's recorded.
Really tired. I had 5 o'clock yesterday morning and just couldn't go back to sleep, so I just got up. And by last night, I was very tired.
Raining.
Oh, it was before.
There's a leak. I know, it's just funny sort of tip-tapping with rain.
Watch for the wind from Mark. The wind or that
The council, mate, you were in
Some better than others. I know.
The scrutineers accept the count. Thank you.
Yes, we do. Thank you.
David, put that with the votes. Thank you. I announce the result of this second ballot. The Honourable Rod Roberts, 21 votes. The Honourable Courtney Hughes-Hoss, 20 votes. Order. I announce the Honourable Rod Roberts is therefore elected Assistant President.
Whatever that means.
See people's true colours.
Unlock the doors.
Right, I'm on duty, so I will stay here.
Papers.
See him in a bit. Yes, or 11:30. Someone's on. I've got to go up to my office before question time.
Private members' business. Private members' business item number 517, standing in the name of Mr Buttigieg, relating to the resumption of debate on the Building Amendment, Mechanical Services and Medical Gaswork Bill 2020.
Is any member seeking the call?
Yes,
Parliamentary Secretary.
This is Mr Buttigieg. He's already given his second reading speech. So.
No, I am. Oh, fabulous. Are you happy to go there? You want to sit?
Wherever you like.
No, I'll stay here. Yeah, if that's all right.
Yes, as soon as I can get
Mr Deputy President. Mr Deputy President, I speak on behalf of the Government in response to the Building Amendment, Mechanical Services and Medical Gaswork Bill 2020. From the outset, I'd like to make it abundantly clear that the government supports a strong regulatory framework for the licensing of persons who carry out medical gas work in New South Wales and has committed to legislating to address these issues. On behalf of the government and the minister responsible, I would like to acknowledge the genuine interest of the Honourable Mark Buttigieg that he showed in this matter and for bringing forward this bill. While the government will oppose the bill, the government has given notice to introduce the Gas Legislation Amendment Medical Gas Systems Bill 2020 in the other place.
Order. If I could just ask the Parliamentary Secretary to pause for a moment. If members could take their conversations perhaps out to the members' lounge, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. I note that we've given notice to introduce our bill in the other place. This bill will establish a more coherent and workable regulatory and licensing scheme for persons and entities involved in medical gas systems in health and medical facilities in New South Wales. In fact, work has already commenced on developing the government's response with a regulation to list the classes of gases to be covered by the scheme approved by the Executive Council this morning. That regulation will commence on 1 November. 2 weeks ago, this House came together, Mr Deputy President, and demonstrated that this Parliament can work cooperatively to pass meaningful legislation in the best interest of the people of New South Wales to lift the standards of residential construction, and the Minister has committed to work with Labor as the government finalises the licensing scheme in the coming months. Mr Deputy President, before I turn to the substance of the bill, it's important that we acknowledge the tragic incidents that are at the heart of the issue we're debating here today. And as a mother, I cannot be more sincere in my contribution. 2 tragic incidents occurred in June and July of 2016 in which 2 newborn babies were mistakenly administered nitrous oxide through an oxygen outlet at Bankstown Lidcombe Hospital. As a result of being administered the wrong medical gas, 1 baby, John Ganem, died and the other suffered serious brain injuries. Further failure to test the gases before the new outlets were commissioned resulted in an oxygen outlet in one of the operating theatres dispensing nitrous oxide instead of oxygen. Tragically, this was not discovered until after both incidents. While I'm sure no words I can offer in this place will be comfort to the families of those 2 children, I would once again like to extend my deepest condolences and sympathies to the families and to thank them for their advocacy on this issue. Mr Deputy President, I now turn to the contents of the bill. The government opposes the bill because of a number of deficiencies that will make the bill unpractical and unworkable. The biggest concern the government has is that the bill creates a shell for a licensing framework under the Home Building Act 1989 without the detail necessary to ensure a comprehensive and effective regulatory regime around it. As currently drafted, the bill is flawed. The Opposition's bill proposes to amend the Home Building Act 1989 to establish a licensing scheme for persons engaged in the construction, installation, maintenance, repair, alteration, testing or commissioning of medical gas or medical gas systems. The bill appears to have been copied from Victorian plumbing legislation without any consideration of how the provisions of the legislation would interact with existing New South Wales laws. The bill seeks to extend its ambit to mechanical heating and cooling systems used in air conditioning, including heating and cooling towers that are used in buildings. Mr Deputy President, this is unnecessary. The Home Building Act 1989 already substantively covers persons involved in those processes. The definition also extends to all premises where medical procedures are carried out, and this could be problematic. For example, the Victorian legislation includes veterinary surgeries, which appear to be beyond the intended scope of this bill. The basis of the licensing framework in the bill is also inadequate. The bill combines work requirements and licensing procedures within the one instrument, and this is inconsistent with building standards and licensing frameworks in this state. For example, licensed gas fitters have oversight under the Gas and Electricity Consumer Safety Act 2017. The licensing and regulation of these persons is contained in the Home Building Act 1989. The bill also lists the education and experience requirements for licence holders. This detail is better placed in the orders and published in the Gazette to allow government to update requirements expeditiously as they change from time to time. This is the process used for mandating qualifications for other licensing frameworks used in New South Wales, and it would be sensible to adopt the same approach for the licensing of medical gas. The bill also requires an experience component of at least 4 years for licensees. Again, any experience component is best left to be determined by the regulator, to be determined in consultation with the industry that is to be regulated. It should not be arbitrarily placed in the Act. Last but certainly not least, the government will oppose this bill on the basis that it's been developed without any consultation or consideration of its impact on the provision of medical services, industry practitioners and the availability of training to meet the timeframes in the bill. This clearly needs to occur so we can ensure industry is ready and those installing medical gas are properly qualified when the scheme commences. Licensed gas fitters and plumbers will also need to undertake additional units of competency for medical gas fitting. Most registered training providers in New South Wales don't currently offer this course. This could mean that we have plumbers and gas fitters who've only ever worked on home installations with no specialist medical gas qualifications working on those medical gas systems in our hospitals. Surely this isn't the intention of the honourable member. Further, the bill is silent on how those with specialist qualifications outside of the plumbing and gas fitting trades will be recognised. The failure to do so cannot be underestimated. That is because this bill, upon assent, will immediately prohibit anybody who is not currently a plumber or gas fitter from working with medical gases in New South Wales. This means that any skilled, experienced practitioners that may in fact have relevant training in medical gas will no longer be able to work. There's been no consideration for how these additional qualifications might be recognised or considered. A failure to do this could cause major and immediate disruption to the supply of medical gases in our hospitals, because we may end up with a lack of people who are licensed to undertake such work as the scheme commences. Mr Deputy President, there are 203 private hospitals, 220 public hospitals, 75 day surgeries and 7,247 dentists in New South Wales. Not one of these appears to have been consulted on the bill before the House. Indeed, the second reading speech makes mention only of a union and other unnamed people. While supporting the intent of the bill, there's been insufficient consultation with medical gas suppliers or potential licensees. Mr Deputy President, the government has committed to legislating to address this issue. We take this seriously, but we want to address the issue effectively, which means establishing an appropriate and robust licensing system. Today, the Gas and Electricity Consumer Safety Amendment Medical Gas Work Regulation 2020 was approved by the Governor. The regulation brings specific medical gases under the overall regulatory regime of the Gas and Electricity Consumer Safety Act. This is the first step in the government's process for establishing a strong regulatory framework for the licensing of persons who carry out medical gas work. The regulation has put the industry on notice that a strict and robust licensing framework with appropriate oversight is on the way. Mr Deputy President, the object of the government's bill is safety first. The government's bill will extend the strong compliance and enforcement powers of the Gas and Electricity Consumer Safety Act to medical gases, while amending the Home Building Act 1989 to establish a new category of medical gas licensee. This enables the government to put in place specific obligations that apply to the medical gases that are in the scope of the new regime and deal with installation, commissioning and testing, as well as requiring compliance with the Australian standards on medical gas installation. We need all these elements to be in place and working end to end. The bill will also operate concurrently with the existing requirements for persons who undertake medical gas work to comply with the Australian standard for medical gases under the Work Health and Safety Act 2011. The government's bill will include strict requirements for the observation of Australian standards to ensure the testing of non-flammable medical gas pipeline systems, ensuring that medical gas systems, once installed, are regularly tested to ensure all components are continuing to operate safely, reliably and consistently. Mr Deputy President, the government recognises that responding in a timely manner is critical, but it's also critical to ensure that the system we establish is robust, effective and comprehensive end-to-end. To this end, the government is committing to establishing a licensing framework by 1 November, which is in fact earlier than the commencement of the private member's bill if it were to be passed. Mr Deputy President, the Government thanks the honourable member for bringing this important issue to the House. We take this seriously and we look forward to the Government delivering on our promise to strengthen the regulation of medical gas work.
Mr Deputy President.
Kate Fairman.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. I rise on behalf of the Greens as health spokesperson to support this bill of the Honourable Mark Buttigieg. This bill has come out about because of the most tragic of circumstances, which we've heard from today and from the Honourable Mark Buttigieg when he spoke in this chamber the other week. Circumstances that should never have been allowed to happen. And I commend the work of the Honourable member and his passionate advocacy for the families and his determination to see the law change so that no other family goes through what the Khan and Ghanem families have. In 2016, at the Bankstown Lidcombe Hospital, 2 newborn babies were administered nitrous oxide instead of oxygen. John Ghanem died and Amelia Khan left hospital suffering life-altering brain damage. Some of what the honourable member outlined during his second read speech on what Amelia and her family is now going through is incredibly moving and disturbing, that they should have to cope with this for the rest of their lives. Amelia is now vision impaired. She will never be able to walk independently. She is likely to have lifelong quadriplegic, cerebral palsy and intellectual disabilities, unlikely to develop speech, essentially dependent on others for all aspects of her care. And when we know that she was born a healthy baby, and what happened at Bankstown Lidcombe Hospital in terms of the nitrous oxide being delivered instead of oxygen, something that should never have happened. It is tragic beyond words. We know that this happened because a contractor incorrectly installed the gas pipes, which were subsequently not properly tested or commissioned. When the Chief Health Officer, Dr Kerry Chant, was tasked with investigating these 2 tragic incidences in 2016, she said that her final report said that if correct procedures were followed when the gas was installed in July 2015, the error would have been identified. So this bill, 4 years on, essentially does what the government should have done years ago. And I note the Honourable Natalie Ward suggesting or informing this place that the government will in fact act now. Clearly that is only as a result of the Honourable Mark Buttigieg's pressure on this issue, and it isn't good enough that there hasn't been anything done in this place since Dr Kerry Chant's report and since those incidences. We know that Victoria and Queensland both require individuals to have a mechanical services and medical gas licence, and in fact Queensland responded to the situation in New South Wales by legislating on the 5th of September 2018, so 18 months ago, if not almost 2 years ago, the Queensland Government introduced legislation because of what happened in New South Wales. Here we are debating a private member's bill, and we should have been debating a government bill. In fact, before I was here the second time around, way back in 2016 or 2017. So it is completely unacceptable to hear the government now talking about the fact that they're onto it, they're introducing regulation, and to trust them that things are going to be okay. We don't have that bill before us. This is before us now, and the Greens wholeheartedly support this as a result. In fact, in Queensland, the LNP opposition did not oppose the government's legislation at the time, and you have to wonder why on earth the delay. What possibly could be the excuse or justification for the government, for the health minister at the time, and the subsequent health minister, in fact. Health minister at the time was Gillian Skinner, subsequently, of course, Brad Hazzard. Why on earth would this be not before them on their desk as an urgent matter, tasking their public servants to get on with the job of ensuring that this doesn't happen again, working to amend, do in fact what we have here before us in terms of private members' business. It is absolutely gobsmacking that we're here. So I'd be really interested to hear from the government, in fact, what their excuse is as to how this has not occurred. What if the same thing happened again 2 years later? What if another baby at another hospital or the same hospital had indeed been delivered nitrous oxide instead of oxygen? And we, of course, can be thankful that that hasn't happened, but without this legislation in place, we know that the risk is so much greater that that could happen again. And imagine having to deal with the family, having to confront the family of yet another baby who has either died or who has been extremely, their life has been impacted so severely as a result of government negligence, to be honest, especially when they realised that this has occurred and needed to be fixed. In fact, the Chief Health Officer Dr Kerry Chan at the time did say, "We are taking steps to further strengthen our system to ensure the public has confidence that this will not happen again. The public can be assured the health system is safe." So what are those steps? What were those steps? No, nothing. We're here again debating private members' business put forward by the Honourable Mark Buttigieg to fix this. So the bill introduces licensing requirements for mechanical services plumbing work by amending the Home Building Act 1989. We have heard that mechanical services work is a very specialist type of plumbing that also includes the construction, installation, replacement, repair, alteration, maintenance, testing or commissioning of any fixed component used in a reticulation system for the supply or removal of medical gases from the gas source to the wall outlet. It is a complex work and requires comprehensive technical training to be performed safely. Currently, again, there is no requirement in New South Wales for a worker to have a qualification or formal training to work with medical gas. Again, just incomprehensible that we are here 4 years after those two tragic cases and we are debating this bill. No requirement for any education or experience to undertake work which can be dangerous and even fatal. I won't go into or explore the details of the bill. I think Mr Buttigieg's work on this has clearly been extensive and consultative. His work for the family, his determination to see justice of sorts for John Gaynham and Amelia Khan and their families is commendable. The Greens support that work and certainly hope that this bill is supported in this place.
The Honourable Penny Sharp.
I just want to rise to make a small contribution to this. And I first of all want to congratulate Mark Buttigieg for his pursuit of this issue when clearly the government has just completely dropped the ball on this matter. 2016, we had two horrific incidences at a hospital where a baby died and another baby was irreversibly injured. Two families distraught, and really it's one of those things where there's actually quite a simple solution to make sure it never happens again, and that is exactly what's in this bill today. It's just so disappointing to see the government stand up and oppose this, and let's be honest about why they're opposing it. They're opposing it because they haven't got their act together. Their minister has been incapable of coming up with a bill, or hasn't been interested in getting a bill, until finally they were pushed and embarrassed into taking some action. And we just need to be honest with ourselves about why that is. You can make all of the excuses about the imperfections of the bill. If you wanted to get this done today, you'd move the amendments if you had genuine concerns. But no, we've had a bill rushed into the lower house from an incompetent minister who...
Point of order, Mr President. The member in her contribution shouldn't make reflections on ministers in the other chamber, and she should be called to order.
I won't call the member in this instance, but I do agree. Any such comment should be made by substantive motion.
Well, I might think about doing that, but I accept the I accept your ruling. I mean, We've got a minister who's failed on building regulations, who's failed on the building commissioner. He's got one job, which is regulation in this state. And even if these issues are complex, sure. But if you can't get it right, that suggests that you need to have a qualified person install medical gas where it's a matter of life and death for the babies that are birthed in the hospitals in New South Wales, what is the point of having your job? What is the point? So I just wanted to really get up to say I congratulate Mark Buttigieg for pursuing this issue doggedly. We have made many jokes. It's very rare that an opposition backbencher finds themselves on 60 Minutes for all the right reasons, and he has done that because he has been prepared to work with the families, the Ganem family and the Khan family, who, can I just say that all of us I know share the great horror of what has happened to them, and we are all committed to making sure that it never happens again. But there is no reason why this bill can't pass today, and it really should pass today. The final comment I want to make is that and he's not going to like me mentioning him, but I'm going to, that journalist Chris O'Keefe has followed this story from day one, and he has pursued this issue uphill and down dale, and he has actually worked closely with the families and he has worked with them to have them tell their stories. That has added great weight to the importance and the expedition of this issue. And I just want to recognise the work that he has done as a journalist to bring this story to light and to get us to this point today, which is that we should be supporting this bill today. This should have been done 2 years ago. This is a failure of the government, and they can make all the excuses. And let's be clear here: they failed to do their job. They're going to now wick in a bill so they can say it was our bill and we fixed it. Well, just get over the pettiness around this. This is a very simple issue that actually will make a difference, that will make it safer for women birthing their babies and for the babies in this state. And it should have been done 2 years ago.
Mr Deputy President. Mr David Shoebridge.
Mr Deputy President, I rise as the Greens Industrial Relations spokes to indicate my support for the Building Amendment, Mechanical Services and Medical Gas Work Bill 2020. And I appreciate and endorse the comments of my colleague, Ms Kate Fairman, who led for us on this bill. Mr Deputy President, it was 4 years ago at Bankstown Lidcombe Hospital when 2 newborn babies were administered what was effectively a poisonous gas instead of oxygen. 4 years ago. One child, Amelia Khan, little Amelia has been left with irreversible brain damage, a lifelong quadriplegic cerebral palsy. She's vision impaired and has intellectual disabilities. That beautiful young girl has a life of dependence, and her family a world of ongoing grief and love, all mixed up. Equally, Sonia Garnham awoke after an emergency caesarean section at that hospital, and she was told and informed that her little boy John had died, again because he was administered poisonous gas instead of oxygen. Mr Deputy President, that was 4 years ago, and in those 4 years the government has not done its job. And I commend the Honourable Mark Buttigieg for him stepping into the breach, because that's what he's done. He's stepped up and he's brought to this Parliament, working with the families. And I heard the Parliamentary Secretary criticise him because he had worked with the union and other unnamed stakeholders. There was criticism of him in that, and I thought it was unworthy criticism from the Parliamentary Secretary.
I'll hear the point of order.
Chair, there's not an accurate reflection of my submission.
Oh, yes, it is.
In any sense. The point of my submission was that there was not wider consultation. There was only consultation with the union. I asked the member to withdraw his reflection on my comments.
To the point of order.
To the point of order.
The comments were only made to critique the honourable member for the nature of his consultation. The member is making a debating point, and I stand by my comments.
Look, I'd bring Mr Shoebridge back to the content of the second read and the bill itself. I have been informed that it is a debating point. If you'd like to make a personal explanation later on in the day.
Hansard will record what I said, not what he wants me to have said.
Okay.
I won't take issue
I
with
draw
you.
Mr Shoebridge back to the content of the bill in front of him rather than what other members have said.
I commend the work of Mark Buttigieg. I commend his working with the families. I commend his work with the unions. I commend the research he's done about the laws that apply in Queensland and Victoria. And I contrast that to the work of the fair trading in New South Wales, and I contrast that to the work of the minister with all of the resources the minister has to hand. On one side, we see a single member without any of that institutional resource brings before this House a complex and comprehensive and considered bill to address the issues 4 years after those tragic deaths. And on the other, we have a minister who's made some promise that something will be done by November. I don't know how you can look at that contrast and not come together and rally around and support the work that's gone into this bill and endorse and support this bill, because surely if there's something that should be above politics, it should be acknowledging this work needs to be done. We need to regulate this area. We need to ensure the tragedy doesn't occur. And we should actually put aside a pettiness about who's going first, who brought it there. Put that pettiness to aside and support and endorse this bill. And I say to the government that if you don't back this bill, when you don't have a solution on the table, when you have a minister and a department who have comprehensively failed, well, that's yet another failure of government, because this should be above politics. What does the bill do? Well, it regulates mechanical services and medical gas work. And as you would know, Mr Deputy President, the provision of medical gas it's a complex provision. It has a high degree of specialised work in it, and as we know, it's a matter of life or death if you get it wrong. Mechanical services can also include work in air conditioning systems in large buildings, which again, if you get it wrong, through the spread of diseases such as Legionella, has a life and death impact. And what this bill seeks to do is regularise and ensure that the people who install those mechanical services, life and death work, are actually licensed, are regulated, and know what they're doing. Unlike New South Wales, the two states that have gone ahead and ensured that medical gas services are regulated, that's Queensland and Victoria, actually have building authorities. And again, the absence of a single coherent building authority in New South Wales has obviously made the work of government harder here. Nobody has ultimate responsibility. It's kind of mixed up between health and fair trading. We don't have a coherent single building authority, and once again, fair trading has shown itself unable to do its job and unable to regulate. It's a structural failure in the New South Wales government that it's about time the government came on and acknowledged. This bill doesn't seek to reinvent the wheel. This bill has looked at those successful models that exist in Queensland and Victoria and has taken those key concepts and requirements from them and brought them into this legislation to provide a credible and comprehensive regulatory measure. And I say again, it is both credible and comprehensive. The kind of nitpicking we've heard from the government here could be done of any government bill. This is genuinely fine work from a private member who's brought before this House a credible solution. And I'd say to the government, rather than push it off to November, rather than try and pretend that fair trading can pull its act together and do something better, support the bill, work on putting some regulations through, and let's get this sorted this week. Mr Deputy President, I could go into some detail about how this bill works. I know that's been dealt with in detail by the member in his second reading contribution. I say again, it's credible, it's comprehensive, we can sort this out today. Let's think about young lives, let's think about safety, and let's legislate.
The Honourable Walt Secord.
As the Shadow Treasurer and as a former Shadow Minister for Health, I rise to speak on the Building Amendment Medical Services and Medical Gas Work Bill 2020. Firstly, I wish to congratulate my colleague, the Honourable Mark Buttigieg, for bringing this matter to the New South Wales Parliament and for his tireless efforts of working to support the families who have been affected by the horrific Bankstown Hospital baby gassing tragedy. I also cite his work with the New South Wales Plumbing Trades Employees Union. This is a private member's bill, and I know that very few private members' bills actually get passed by this chamber. It would be very worthwhile, and I urge the government to put aside petty differences and bickering and a vague promise of action of delay in November. I urge them to support this bill and help with its passage today. I'll be brief, as I wish to just symbolically express my support for this bill. This bill is a bill to amend the Home Building Act 1989. The object of this bill is to provide for the licensing of contractors and the certifying of supervisors and tradespersons who carry out mechanical services work, including medical gas systems work. Legislation is designed to prevent a repeat of the tragic events that took place at the Bankstown Lidcombe Hospital in 2016, where two newborn babies were catastrophically administered poisonous gas instead of oxygen, and there was a cross-connection of medical gas delivery outlets which caused these events. Now, I'm familiar with these details because they occurred when I was the Shadow Minister for Health, and Mrs. Gillian Skinner was the Health Minister at the time 4 years ago. So I just wish to urge the government again to support this bill, and I wish to again express my condolences to the Gahan family and to extend my support to the Khan family. And the best tribute and the best mark of respect to both babies would be for the government to support this bill and pass it today.
Are there the Honourable John Graham.
Thank you, Deputy President. I want to briefly join in with my colleagues in supporting this bill. I think when good work's done, it's important to recognise it, and I want to recognise the work of my colleague in the chamber. I also just want to say this. As a parent, I can't imagine anything worse than this, and it's just an incredible act of generosity from the families to then take that moment and really try and change this for other families, for other parents, and drive some systemic change. So I really want to thank the families as well for what they're doing. I commend the bill.
Are any further members seeking the call? No? The member in reply.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. Look, I want to firstly acknowledge those who contributed to the debate. The Parliamentary Secretary, the Honourable Natalie Ward, my Honourable colleague Kate Fairman, my Labor colleagues Penny Sharp, Walt Secord and John Graham, and of course the Honourable David Shoebridge. Look, I guess I had naively assumed that when I brought a bill like this, which had a lot of legwork put into it, thoroughly researched, consulted with relevant stakeholders, and I'll go into that in more detail later, that the government may actually reach out and get on board to try and knock this into shape to a point where we were ready to legislate right here, right now. Not in 2 months' time when we come and sit again, not on the 1st of November, not by light touch regulation, but by a robust legislative response. Now, let me be clear, this is not about the Labor Party, it's not about the government, it's not about Mark Buttigieg, it's not about anyone other than those families who have gone through this tragedy, and it's about the families who may go through the same tragedy if we don't do this as soon as possible. Mr. President, right here, right now, out there in the real world, this sort of work is happening as we speak. Unqualified, unregulated, unlicensed, no certification whatsoever. So we have a situation whereby 4 years ago, almost to the date, Mr. President, this Friday, the 20th of June, will be the 4-year anniversary of the tragic poisoning of young baby Amelia. the switching of nitrous oxide and oxygen lines because there's no standard, there's no licensing requirement, there is no accountability. Now, during that intervening 4 years, there has been no shortage of attention on this issue. There was no shortage of media when this issue began in 2016. So we had the poisoning of baby Amelia, who for the rest of her life and for the rest of her family's life will require the highest level of care. That little baby, who through no fault of her own, through no genetic defect, but simply because of human error, which could have been avoided had we had a robust regulatory and licensing system in place, will now suffer for the rest of her life, and so will her family. Then a month later, those same switched lines caused the poisoning and death of baby John. And we have a safe work investigation into the hospital, which was subsequently dropped in lieu of an enforceable undertaking, which is basically a tick and flick so that contractors coming into the hospital have to register. The poor soul who did the deed, who, had we had a licensed and regulatory system, would have been accountable, got fined $100,000. And 4 years on, only this week, Mr. President, out at Nepean Hospital, we've got evidence of this sort of work still happening right here, right now, by people literally walking in off the street. 7 of the 14 people out at Nepean Hospital installing medical gas without any training, any qualification, any certification. I've had more updated reports of contaminated lines out at Westmead Hospital. And the government wants to say that their approach will be more robust and more thorough, and not once, other than the 11th hour, just outside this chamber this morning, Mr. President, have they reached out. I've only just got contact from Minister Anderson's office to say that they want to talk about the legislation, which is absolutely fine. You know what? Let's get it through this House today. Let's talk about amendments if you've got them and they improve the bill. And let's pass it in the lower house on Thursday. We can actually get on board and do this on a unity ticket for the benefit of those families and for the benefit of people of New South Wales. Now, I think, Mr. President, we constantly hear this across the chamber. We constantly hear it from our constituents. Why do we have to have this political divide where both sides can't get on board for the common good and legislate in favour of the residents they're supposed to represent? Now, I understand that's not always possible. We have ideological differences and philosophical differences which prevent that happening. But this is not about ideology. It's not about politics. It's not a partisan issue. This is an issue we actually all agree on, and there is a legislative fix. It's incumbent on us to fix it with legislation. Again, not in 2 months, not in 3 months, not in 6 months, right here, right now. This chamber has the capacity to push this through. On that side of the chamber, you people have the influence and the responsibility to talk to your colleagues, to come and talk to us about doing what we have to do to get it through tomorrow. Not in 6 months, tomorrow. Now, I just want to go to some of the aspects of the bill that the Parliamentary Secretary referred to, and I want to walk people through it. Mr. President, this bill has not been undertaken lightly. We have industry experts, and I know those on the other side are often fond of criticising us for our links with the unions, but I tell you what, those links with the unions and those key stakeholders are critical for us to be able to bring this sort of legislation to the table, because they actually have members doing the work. They know how these things work because they live it and breathe it. Now, the fact of the matter is this: there is a whole genre of work, and I wonder sometimes, without trying to sound derogatory, whether or not those opposite, and particularly the parliamentary secretary who led for the government, have actually read my bill. That genre of work is called mechanical services. The installation of medical gas is a specialist subset of work which the plumbing trade refers to as mechanical services, which means that not only does it involve the installation of pipe work for medical gas, which caused the Bankstown tragedy, but when you're a plumber starting off on your trade, you basically pick two areas that you want to go down. You either pick the traditional water plumbing, which we all think of as a traditional plumber, that licensed trade, that trade of water plumbing, when Joe Bloggs comes to your house to plumb the bathroom, he or she is fully licensed, 5-6 year TAFE course, Cert 3, traditional water plumbing trained. If you decide to go down the other path, which is the installation of medical gas and the pipe work associated with things like cooling towers, industrial scale air conditioning, that's a whole separate genre of work which is totally unregulated, doesn't require any certification, doesn't require any training, doesn't require any experience. So what you have, Mr. President, is a system where people, by dint of experience, learn on the job but never have any formal training or qualification. What this bill does is says that if we've got that class of person out there doing that work, it makes sense to legislate to regulate the whole gamut, not just medical gas, but the mechanical services associated with those cooling towers, which, as my honourable colleague pointed out, if it's done incorrectly, causes Legionella. We remember the reports of deaths in Sydney over the last few years from Legionella. If you get those things wrong, it's just as deadly as medical gas. So why wouldn't you recognise that class of work? The same people who specialise in medical gas also do mechanical services. So the bill is comprehensive in the sense that it covers all of that genre of work. And if we were to just legislate for medical gas, which is what the government's suggesting, all that remaining work continues on unregulated. So we could find a situation where someone installs something incorrectly and there's Legionella outbreak and deaths from that, and we didn't take the opportunity to legislate when we could. So I criticise the government's point about our legislation being unnecessary in terms of regulating and certifying mechanical services in that broader genre. Now, the legislation amends the Home Building Act. Mr. President, for those who know how the Home Building Act works currently in kindred trades, everyone would be familiar with electricians. I'm a qualified electrician by trade.
Get out of town.
If you want to get an electrical licence, you go and do a 4-year TAFE course, you go get 4 years on-the-job experience, and your employer reconciles that training with the Department of Fair Trade, and you get a licence. Similar with water plumbing. 4 or 5 year apprenticeship, it's actually longer. Water plumbing's actually longer than electrical. 5-year apprenticeship, licence, trade, off you go. If you want to work on mechanical services, the cooling tower stuff I was talking about, and medical gas, it's all bets off. Mr. President, we have evidence of bakers baking bread, plasters installing chipboard one day and the next day installing medical gas. So what this legislation does is amend the Home Building Act to fill in that chasm and bring it up to the same standard as electrical work and water plumbing, so that if you want to go and do that work, you've actually got to go and get the proper qualification and you've got to get the proper licence. Now, I heard the Parliamentary Secretary refer to the fact that it's not comprehensive enough, it's going to take 2 years. What does the member say about all those who are working out there on medical gas right here, right now? Is he suggesting that work's going to stop overnight? Well, again, I wonder whether or not the Parliamentary Secretary actually read the bill, or whether or not the Minister Anderson has actually briefed her on the detail, because clearly they're not across it. What this bill does is institute a 2-year period whereby the certification, licensing and training system would not take effect for 2 years after assent, to allow the training market to mature. Now, that training market, as the Parliamentary Secretary said, in a critical sense, specifies national competencies. Guess what? The Victorian regime and the Queensland regime are doing this right here, right now, and they've used the national competencies, which are recognised throughout Australia, for medical gas and mechanical services as part of their training package. What this bill will do, Mr. President, is induce that training market to start to provide those competencies. So in the 2-year ramp-up period, you'll find that TAFE and other institutions will start to provide those courses, and the industry will reorientate itself, knowing full well that if you want to do mechanical services, they're the competencies you have to go and do. Now, in the interim, what the bill does, as happens in kindred trades in a ramp-up period, is it allows the Secretary of the Department of Fair Trade, based on experience, qualifications and any exams the Secretary may deem necessary, to determine whether or not someone is competent in the interim. So let's flesh that out in a practical sense. If I'm a person installing mechanical services, be it the pipework associated with cooling towers or medical gas at Nepean Hospital, and I can show the Secretary of the Department of Fair Trade that I've been doing this for X amount of years, or I've passed his or her practical examination, or that I've got the technical competency, the Secretary of the Department, under this bill, will have the power to grant a licence, so that those people who are doing this work properly and who are fair dinkum, not the bodgies that are coming in off the street without any qualifications, will be able to do the work. And then after 2 years, the industry would have come up to speed in terms of providing the competencies, and the licensing system kicks into gear. This is not a half-heated, half-baked approach, Mr. President. This has been thoroughly researched, and again, I implore the government, there is still time, back us in on this. Vote with us on this and get your lower house colleagues, if you think there's improvements, be fair dinkum about it. You've given notice of motion that you're going to introduce your licensing bill, which, as I said, solely is restricted and confined to medical gas. The legislation hasn't been second read. We don't know what it looks like. Minister Anderson has only just reached out this morning via his staffer. I haven't had an in-depth conversation. If you want the intel to make this work, get on board with this bill now. We can knock this into shape and have it into law on Thursday, and we can actually go out on a unity ticket and tell the people of New South Wales that for once, both sides of the Parliament got on board and legislated in favour of those families who have suffered this terrible, terrible tragedy and injustice. And I want to put it on the record that I think we've all got a responsibility here, and in fact we're culpable if we don't get together on this, drop the politics, drop the games, and work to get the legislation implemented this week, not in 6 months. How would it be, Mr. President, if, as a result of the inaction of this House, we walk out of here today and a similar tragedy happens, a death or another accident, because we've failed to get our heads together because we're too busy playing political games because the government wants to take ownership of it. Or, worse still, kick it into the gutter until the media heat goes out of it and delay and obfuscate again, so that 4 years down the track, when I'm halfway through my term, we're still debating it. Not on, not happening. I can assure the House that the Labor Party, and certainly I, as the lead on this issue, will not let this go till we get an outcome. And I would like to think, I know there's a lot of decent people on that side of the House, I would like to think that we could work together on this bill and get it done this week. Again, not in 6 months, not in 2 months, it's not good enough. The bill's been well researched, it's thorough, it's based on consultation with the unions and industry. And before I wind up, Mr. President, I'll just reiterate that because I did get a bit of criticism on the level of consultation that was just with you. Can I just point out to the House, unions actually are co-stakeholders with employers. So the companies that, guess what? The companies that employ union members actually have an interest in the industry as well. And the Plumbers Union have an interest in those companies because those companies pay their members. Their members don't get paid. The Plumbers Union don't have any members. So they talk to each other. And we've got companies out there telling the Plumbers Union that this is insane. We need regulation and we need licensing and we need it now because there's too much uncertainty and too much liability. And can I say, if you're a plumber doing this sort of work and you're doing the right thing, you don't want to race to the bottom where Mr. Shonky's doing it for half the price because they're switching gas lines or contaminating gas lines. I mean, this is a no-brainer, Mr. President. The legislation is comprehensive. It's a good foundation. If you're really serious about it, vote with us right here, right now, and let's get it into the LA and pass this thing on behalf of New South Wales residents, but more importantly, on behalf of those poor families, the Khan family and the Ghanem family, so that at least something positive comes out of it. Commend the bill to the House.
The question is that the Building Amendment, Mechanical Services and Medical Gas Work Bill 2020 be read a second time. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. No. I think the noes have it. Ayes have it. Division required. Ring the bells.
No one will say anything.
We go upstairs.
I know, old habits die hard.
We stay where we are. Yeah, that's right, we stay where we are. That's right. We don't have to, we just stay where we are. That's right, he forgot. I did but see him passing by.
Stop the bells. Stop the bells, please. Is leave granted to withdraw the division? The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Clerk will read the order of the day. I believe Grizzly. Is leave granted to proceed to the third read forthwith? Yes. Leave is granted? Leave is granted.
You called it, you called it off.
You move the bill be read a third time. You have to move. Yep. Okay, none of us were.
Mr. President, I move that this bill be read a third time.
Congratulations, Mark.
The question is that of the member that the bill be read a third time. All those in the opinion say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Great.
The ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Building Amendment, Mechanical Services and Medical Gas Work Bill 2020, third read.
Thank you.
And they're not ready. They don't have it ready. Fair. So that they just they called the division and they pulled their head in.
Perfect.
Fair enough.
The clerk.
Come and see me. Can we have a chat about? Are you doing this? No.
I'm doing
Private Members Business Item number 546, standing in the name of Ms Cusack, relating to the vandalism of public monuments.
The Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you. I move that Private Members Business Item number 546, outside the order of precedence, be considered in a short form format.
Does that need to be put? Yep. All those in favour, say aye. All those opposed? The ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Thank the House. I move item 546 standing in my name. In March 2001, the Taliban in Afghanistan blew up the world's two largest standing Buddhas, one of them 165 feet high. The magnificent Buddhas, Bamiyan, were 1,700 years old, magnificently carved out of a cliff that in ancient time was home to hundreds of monks. The television footage made me gasp in disbelief, and I have wondered ever since about the mentality that drives a vandal to destroy an icon belonging to other people's cultures. Fast forward to May 2016, and I travelled to a very different Muslim country, Jordan, where I was able to visit a Syrian refugee camp. And on the trip back to Amman, my driver spoke with pride of Jordan's incredible human heritage, including places like Petra and so many of the Old and New Testament sites. And I asked how it could be in Jordan that the icons of non-Muslim cultures, including invaders like Christian crusaders, could have been so carefully preserved over millenniums. And he explained Jordanians consider themselves blessed to be custodians of such treasures. He told me their cultural significance does not belong to Jordan, it belongs to the world, and it is their honour and responsibility to protect them for the world. So here in Australia, I feel equally passionate for Aboriginal heritage, and the destruction of any sacred site by a mining company has rightly triggered outrage in this country. And I say this for sure, it does not reflect the values and attitudes of the overwhelming majority of Australians in 2020. Now, the statue of Captain Cook in Hyde Park is no Bamiyan Buddha, but it is pretty special to many of us. He is integral to the history of modern Australia. I assume vandalising Captain Cook is saying to every non-Aboriginal Australian who admires him that we're all racists and we all deserve to be torn down. To my knowledge, Aboriginal people are not interested in attacking Captain Cook's statue. or erasing the facts of history. Quite to the contrary. But the clandestine way in which this vandalism was done, with the perpetrators trying to sneak away in the dead of night, was almost designed to give the public the impression that Aboriginal people were responsible for desecrating the statue. And thank goodness suspects were apprehended. They are not Aboriginal, and the outrage that this has generated must not be channelled towards Aboriginal people who appear innocent of this crime. It seems likely Green activists have done this, and I accept the matter is before the courts, but the important point is that we must not allow their plots to derail the tremendous progress we have made as Australians since the 1960s to reconcile our cultures and find ways to move forward together. I was really offended yesterday when the Greens actually defended this action and compared it to the American civil rights movement of the 1960s. I mean, really, I don't recall Martin Luther King sneaking about with a spray can in the dead of night, vandalising statues. In fact, everything I know about him and the likes of Mahatma Gandhi, the greatest civil rights leader in history, suggests they were pacifists who reject violence and hatred, and they are trying to bring people together, not tear them apart. So it is utterly perverse to invoke their memory of these great and inspiring events in defence of a sneaky act of vandalism against Captain Cook's statue. I understand what is going on in the United States, I really do, but that is not Australia in 2020, thank God. This effort by an extremist ideology rooted in Marxism is to weaponise our history. And make no mistake, the narrative is not about justice for Aboriginal Australians, it's a bigger plan to restructure our nation socially and economically. Vandalising statues are frightening tactics of radicals, and we should not underestimate them. Denigrating and weaponising history is dangerous to Australia's democracy and future. This parliament is a pluralist institution, and we are right here, right now, with the opportunity for people to state their case and do things properly. Criminal acts that incite hate and divide our community should be condemned by all. And this is the place, here and now, to make those decisions and show the respect that will help our Indigenous brothers and sisters and is essential to improving their lives.
Is any other member seeking the call?
No, it's all right.
The Honourable Penny Sharp.
Thank you. I only have 3 minutes, so I'll be brief. The first thing I would say is that this motion is of limited value in relation to the issues of the day. We've just had an economic statement that talks about 10% unemployment, a contraction of our economy, 250,000 people out of work, and we've got wage cuts and a whole range of things to debate, and yet the government has chosen to make this their priority motion for today. That's the first thing I want to note about this. The second thing is it wasn't George... If we're going to talk about history, we at least should get history correct. It wasn't Sir Winston Churchill that said those who fail to learn from history are condemned to repeat it. It was the Spanish-American philosopher George Santayana. Now, I was thinking about moving an amendment around this, but I will not waste the time of the... I will not taste... Yeah, and even the... Well, I take the interjection, but even the paraphrasing was wrong, because he said it in the House of Commons in 1948, those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So the member couldn't even get the quote right, let alone the person who said it. Look, the second thing that I'll say about this is we've got two amendments here that we wish to move. One is that we wish to move an amendment which adds an extra point in, which says E supports the right to peaceful and non-violent protest, the rights of working people to undertake industrial action, freedom of assembly, free association and political expression. That's in addition to that bill. And the second point that we want to make is we want to amend D to delete D and replace with condemns vandalism. That should be something that we should all support. I do think I should move the George Santayana motion, but for the shortness of time, I will not do this. The final points that I actually want to make about this, the final points that I want to make about this motion and statues is that where is the outrage? Where is the outrage on a range of different Aboriginal sites that have been destroyed in New South Wales in this government? We have had many discussions over many years about places like the Butterfly Cave in Wallsend, completely ruined, a very special women's birthing cave that was sought to have heritage listing and did not get it, and has had ongoing problems with development, and that cave is being destroyed. Where is the outrage about that? We've got an outrage happening, and we're going to be discussing that later up on the Liverpool Plains in terms of the grooves and the grinding grooves up near the Liverpool Plains. The Indigenous owners are extremely upset about this, and this is something that we cannot allow to happen. What happened in Western Australia brings shame upon all of Australia. 45,000 years. 45,000 years of heritage gone in 1 second. And I'm happy to have a serious debate about the way we protect special Aboriginal sites. And I actually want to acknowledge the Honourable Don Harwin, who did actually list someone he was the Heritage Minister. But the real question is what is really going to actually save those sites. The last point I want to make is, if we want to talk about heritage, what's happening with the Parramatta Female Factory, what's happening with the Royal Oak Hotel that's just also been destroyed by this government. So I look forward to the amendments.
Member C, Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. President. The truth is incontrovertible. Panic may resent it, ignorance may deride it, malice may distort it, but there it is. Spoken by Sir Winston Churchill in the House of Commons in 1916, it is as relevant today as the day that it was spoken.
You got it wrong.
We have moments in our history that are proud and moments in our history, listen Penny, that are not so proud. But that does not change the fact that it is our history. We cannot simply decide to hide from our history, to cover it up, to destroy it, simply to please the far left extremists. We acknowledge our shared history, our history of greatness and our moments of shame. But we cannot hide parts of that history. We cannot engage in Orwellian groupthink. We cannot let ourselves be told what history we can and cannot believe in by extremists. As Churchill said, if we open a quarrel between the past and the present, we shall find that we have lost the future. It is worth thinking back to one of my favourite novels, 1984. In particular, its depiction of a Marxist-style removal of statues and cultural icons. Every record has been destroyed or falsified, every book rewritten, every picture has been repainted, every statue and street building has been renamed, every date has been altered, and the process is continuing day by day and minute by minute. History has stopped. Is this the type of future that we want to embrace? Is this the New South Wales? Is this the Australia that we want? I can tell you now that this side does not want that, and this side will not accept that. Several years ago, the world collectively watched in horror the footage of ISIS trying to change history in Iraq, Syria and Libya. These horrible scenes of cultural destruction sought to destroy remnants of the past, remove the cultural connection between the people and their past, and were rightly condemned globally. We are an old nation, collectively with over 60,000 years of history, and any aim to destroy, belittle or remove any part of that history, be it from the last 200 years or the last 20,000 years, is completely unacceptable. Cook, Macquarie and others are part of the reason our nation is what it is today. The vandals who are defacing statues and destroying public property are not protesters. They are simply vandals and anarchists. They are people who are seeking to tear down our society, people who have no respect or regard for the rule of law, and people who use a false veil to protest to hide their disgusting actions. Behaviour never lies. We must call out these acts for what they are and condemn these actions of criminality. Tearing down and vandalising our monuments is tearing down ourselves. It's time we build up our history. We add to it. We add further monuments.
Places.
Our reflection is to keep history, and to build it up, not to tear it down.
Any member seeking the call?
In reply.
Before I give the next member the call, can I just indicate the following? I'm very reluctant to stop a member from speaking when there's a clear time limit of 3 minutes only. And so continued interjections compel me to do one of two things. Stop the member from speaking, in which case the member will lose time, or just immediately call members to order for the first time, or second if it's appropriate. So I don't intend to give any warnings during these take-note debate during these debates on 30-minute short-form basis, I will simply call a member to order if they keep interjecting, without any warning whatsoever, because I think it's the only way we'll be able to get through this. It's something I'm always very reluctant to do, to call members to order, especially when we're in this COVID-type situation and the difficulties that we're all facing. But I have to, at some stage, say enough is enough, and I will call them to order.
Very wise.
According to sessional order, business is now interrupted for questions. Are there any questions,
President.
Leader of the Opposition?
Thank you, Mr. President. My question without notice is to the Leader of the Government, the Minister for Finance and Small Business. Minister, given there are 806,000 businesses in New South Wales and only 69,000 of those, 8.6%, have received any assistance from your government, do you stand by your claims that your stimulus measures are in fact a success?
8.6%. Just apologise.
No, in fact, as I understand it, and I thank the member for his question, as I understand it, we're getting some jobs figures out today, and there seems to be a bit of a rebound in
Tomorrow.
jobs figures. Tomorrow, is it?
Thursday.
And you must be looking forward to it because
It's called the ABS.
They're optimistic.
You wouldn't know it, but
Order. Minister, resume his seat. I can stop the clock in these circumstances. Can I remind members of safe distancing rules, please? I think you're a little bit too close to each other, but I don't have a tape measure with me.
I like them.
Order.
I put in the complaint.
The first question's been asked by the Leader of the Opposition. A very important question, very good question. The Minister literally spoke for what appears to be exactly 12 seconds, and the interjections commenced by the Honourable Walt Secord, and sadly the Minister started to respond to the interjections, and we suddenly found ourselves in a situation where the two of you started to continue. I'm not having a bar of that. I call the Honourable Walt Secord to order for the first time. I call the Minister Damien Tudor-Hope to order for the first time, and I will continue to do so. The Minister has the call.
Thank you. I'm not thanking you for the call to order.